as students on campuses, you have access to an international network. You know how to build some skills in this area, and you also have the option, if you fundraise, of summer internships in these countries, starting to build local partners, other students who also want to see a world where we don't have mass atrocity crimes as this sort of acceptable part of life. And it's not only, of course, the democracies, there's also the non-democracies, and China is a classic example, but again, the Genocide Olympics campaign shows that if you get it right, you can move them as well. And I really feel like if we had spent just a fraction of our creative and intellectual energy that went into just pushing Washington all the time to speak more strongly on Darfur, and had instead devoted some of that to working out how to operate in this sort of new world order, not so new anymore, then things would have really shifted quite dramatically in Darfur. The other thing that we learn, and I feel like Stan learned this before anybody else, is that it's not just about creating the outcry at the moment of crisis. We're going to have to change the whole architecture of the system. It's just not primed right now to know how to respond effectively to these crimes. The Genocide Prevention Task Force did an amazing job of laying some of that out, and it just needs activists to pick it up and run with it. But what I keep being told by a range of people is that activists won't go for it. Bureaucratic reform, you know, I get it. It's not sexy, you can't put it on a banner. But I really feel like STAN students in particular, who are the grass tops of this, are smart enough and sophisticated enough to realize that if that's what it's going to take to respond to mass atrocity crimes quicker and more effectively, then it's just about finding the way to make that attractive to people. I don't have any doubt that you can do it if you take it on and really own it. We also learned some things about the nature of a mass movement. And remember, this was a grand experiment in building a constituency rather than your typical Human Rights Watch model. What we learned about a mass movement, and keep this front and center as I move forward, is that it can be incredibly, incredibly effective. The amount of change that it got within the US political system so quickly shows that you can talk until you are blue in the face about human rights, but nothing focuses minds quite as much as being able to say you've got a constituency backing you up. And so I think there's something about the model that is incredibly right. It's not the right tool for all situations, but there's really something here that needs to be nurtured and expanded and made permanent over time. That said, like anything, it comes with risks. And I think probably those of us involved at the start of the movement didn't really have a grip on what some of those risks were. There's a few, but I just want to focus on one because it's something that you can mitigate the risk of over time. It's that if you're dealing with a constituency of volunteers, now not only students but people who are working full-time jobs, not getting their income from a human rights organisation, that have a lot of other family and community commitments. If you're working with a volunteer base, you need success in order to sustain them. You can't be saying to people, you know, thanks for picking up kids late from work and missing that deadline and you achieved nothing today. You have to be able to show them that what they're doing is making a difference. Now, if you are actually making a difference quickly, that's fine. But if you're dealing with a really tough issue, then that becomes a challenge for the leaders of the movement. And what you started to see on Darfur was that people were setting up fake successes, quick wins, things to feed back to the constituency to show them that they were being influential, but weren't really doing very much for Darfur itself. And so success becomes defined not by are Darfuris able to return safely to their homes? Success becomes how many emails did we manage to send to the Secretary of State today? The other thing that happens that sort of gets skewed with a mass movement model is that you preference policy asks that are visible. so that if you actually get the government officials to do it, then you have something to show back to the movement to say, here, look at what you did, you were successful. So getting Washington to speak very loudly, the public rhetoric you see a big push for. Getting the appointment of yet another special envoy. A special envoy can be good, but it can also be pretty bad depending on who you get. And yet we cling to this idea of continuing to push for a special envoy as if that in and of itself is a sign of success. Now, like I said, I think anything that we do comes with risks. And so the answer here is not to throw away the mass movement model. The mass movement model can be great. It's to work out how to mitigate those risks. And you all can do it. Asking yourselves as leaders of the movement, is what we're pushing for here actually going to create a change on the ground in Darfur? And it may not be that you're always getting direct change, but do you have a plausible theory of how that change is going to play out? Is it the case that whoever you are targeting with your advocacy effort actually has the leverage, has the capacity to create that change on the ground? You need to be asking it of yourselves, you need to be asking it of each other. Today, the spotlight has very much fallen away again from Darfur. And yet, in the last 3 months, there has been a greater rate of bombing and of displacement. The rate is higher than we've seen in the last 3 years. And the government is doing what all governments do when they want to hide their crimes. They have shut out the Sudanese journalists, they're not issuing visas to the foreign journalists. And part of the reason that they're getting away from it is that the spotlight has now shifted to South Sudan. This is an ongoing problem for the Sudanese people. We keep putting the spotlight on just one part of their country, this beautiful, beautiful country, just one part at a time. So back in 2003, the worst of the atrocities in Darfur, and the focus was completely on North-South. Then the spotlight moved over to Darfur. While it was on Darfur, we were failing people in the east of the country, in the south, in the north. This North-South peace agreement that everybody fought so hard for wasn't being implemented. Now the spotlight has shifted back again, and we're leaving Darfur in darkness, and leaving many Darfuris who felt that they had the world standing beside them, feeling betrayed. The answer here is not to keep shifting the spotlight, but to put the floodlights on the whole country and to see the interconnections between these different stories, all of which, it won't surprise anybody in this room, come together in Khartoum. I want to end, I think, with something that's a bit of a strange conclusion for someone who has written what is in effect a lessons learned book, which is to say you cannot cut and paste lessons learned. Lessons learned writing is very valuable, and we've learned some things across time that seem to be consistent across crises. The earlier we get there, the more lives we can save. The more work that we do at changing the architecture of the whole system, not just within the US government, but within UN reform as well, the better that we do those things, the better equipped we will be to respond at the moment of crisis. But beyond that, I feel like there's just no substitute for a really hard-headed scrutiny of the global, regional, and local leverage points in each new context. And these things can become out of date pretty quickly. You have to be checking your theory of change, and then checking it again 6 months later, and then checking it again after that. If we can build a movement that is self-critical and self-reflective in that way, it's only going to strengthen